When I first started in astrophotography, one of the things I really struggled with was getting the stars to be perfectly in focus, achieving and setting infinity focus properly. There's a number of different ways you can go about it, some better than others in my opinion. Some I have tried and flat out won't use, others that I use all the time. So I wanted to make a quick video and show you a number of different ways that you can achieve infinity focus when you're doing astrophotography. You've probably seen a number of different videos from people out there showing, a lot of these techniques are basically the same. I can only talk to my own experience with this stuff, and hopefully you can take something away from it, something you can try out in the field the next time you go shoot, and start making your life a little bit easier when you're out in the dark. The first of which is basically just setting your focus during daylight hours. The idea being it's so much easier to see, all of the other extraneous elements of difficulty are removed, and you set your focus on a distant object, get that locked in perfectly, and simply just put a piece of gaffer's tape, masking tape, duct tape, whatever it is you've got, over the focus ring so that it's not going to move, and you're set for the later in the night. The thing I find most difficult with this is a couple different things, right? You're either totally locked into that one spot, you're just waiting all day long, waiting for dark, not touching your camera, not doing anything else, or you're moving around and you run the risk of just bumping that a little bit. Even though it's taped, that ring might move just enough to throw off the focus. If you're just starting out with this and everything else in the dark is already proving to be enough to handle, this is a good way to maybe get started with some stuff and get close. I find it's not ever going to be perfect, razor sharp, but if you're just struggling to get even close to that focus point, it's a good way to go. The next, and this is the one that I always really personally use and always would recommend, it seems to be one of the more finicky approaches, but it tends to yield results that are just a lot more dialed in than the others, is first of all, take a look at the focus ring on your lens, right? Pretty much all, if not all, lenses will show the infinity focus mark. The problem is that point of infinity focus is always kind of variable. It shifts around a little bit. It's not exactly the same. It can differ from lens manufacturer from one to the next, from lens focal length from one to the next, or even just from one copy of the same lens to the next. It can be a little bit different. So we really can't just rely on that marking on the camera. But what I will say is, use that to your advantage to at least get it dialed in close to that point to start before you start getting everything set up, so that at least most of the stars are going to show up on the viewfinder. With that in place, you can then point your camera and lens at one of the brighter stars that you see out in the sky, and make sure you get that right in the center of the frame. You don't want to be setting your focus with the stars in the outer edges of the frames. The reason being, most lenses, and especially a lot of the lower quality ones or ones that don't really perform that well for astrophotography, will have less than ideal conditions in the outer side of the frame as is. You start to see some coma and some color aberrations of various sorts out in the edges. So we don't want to be setting our focus in a portion of the frame where there might already be known problems. So we'll get that star right in the center. And using live view, zoom in as far as you can on that star. More than likely, the resolution of the screen is going to be a little bit lower than what you're actually getting. So when you zoom in that far, the star might start to look a little fuzzy, a little pixelated as is, even if it's sharp, but that's okay. What we're really looking for is when we're changing that focus ring and moving it just ever so slightly back and forth, you can kind of see that star grow and contract as it's going in and out of focus more. And really it's just this game of going too far and back and far and back and just making these minute incremental changes until you're confident that that star is the smallest that it can be, even if it does look a little bit fuzzy when you're zoomed in. When it's small, it's sharp. The next method you can use is quite similar to the one I'm just describing here with using the stars themselves, but this is about just using a distant light or a distant object, anything that's got a smaller size, pinpoint size, some sort of contrast that you can easily see on your live view in the night is going to achieve the same thing, given it's far enough away from your camera. So, if you're in a city, if you're near a city, if you're really near pretty much anything nowadays that has man-made elements, there's more than likely going to be some light source that you can see. Do the same thing as you would with the star. Get that light source in the middle of your frame and start adjusting that focus ring back and forth until that same light source is in a pinpoint smallest size that it can be. When you have that, if that's in focus, so are the stars given the distance. I mean, that is the point of the infinity focus. Anything beyond a certain distance from your camera lens is going to retain focus, or at least acceptable focus within that range. Another option that you can use that I'm not a big fan of, but it's nice to have in your toolkit, and I've used this on occasion when there's just not a great star. Maybe the clouds have rolled in, or the sun has just recently set and I want to get everything set up ahead of time and I don't see the stars yet, is find an object that's far enough away from your camera to be within that range of infinite focus once it's properly set. And using your headlamp or flashlight or whatever you've got with you, just kind of illuminate that object and set focus the same way you would during daylight hours. Whether you're using live view, if you're using autofocus as a starting point, mind you, or looking through the viewfinder, through the mirror, whatever you've got on your setup. Do it as normal, get that focus locked in, and it's going to be the same if you're pointing at the sky or if you're pointing at a tree, a bush, a plant that's 50 feet away from you, 50 yards away, whatever. A note about the autofocus though. Whether you're doing that at night using your headlamp or flashlight during daylight hours, whatever that may be, more often than not, it's gonna get you pretty close. It's gonna get you close enough in a lot of cases to having a perfect setup. And a lot of newer cameras nowadays especially are actually getting quite good at being able to utilize the autofocus features even in low light situations. The problem is having reliance on that. A lot of it's gonna get so close, you'll probably never notice the difference until you point it at stars. Stars have a way of showing every minor flaw that you have in your focus. Even the smallest little degree of error in that focus is gonna show itself in, at minimum, kind of a halo around the star. It's not that pinprick that we come to expect in a really well done astrophoto. If you're using autofocus as a tool to really kind of get close, awesome, it's probably good enough. If you're using it on an ultra wide angle lens, if you're in the 14 mil, 24 mil range, it's again, probably close enough. But if you're really after that perfect focus, the perfect image, the one you can blow up, the one you can print, I will always argue for doing things the manual way, having that extra degree of hands-on ability to refine and perfect and just get everything dialed in perfectly. Even if only for the fact that there's going to be a time when you're out in the field and you're using your autofocus and something changed and it doesn't work now. And if you don't have those baseline skills and experience to be able to just dial that in manually, your night just became more difficult at minimum, if not destroyed. So take the time, try it, learn it, fail with it. Go out there, spend all night shooting these photos. You've got all these great setups, you get it back, and like I said, you get it on your computer, it's not what you thought it was. Things change when you're looking at it from a 2-inch LCD versus a 27-inch monitor. So nothing will teach us faster than wasting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours overnight. Circling back to what I was talking about with the infinity focus and the hyperfocal length, hyperfocal distance of a lens. This is going to change depending on the lens you have, depending on the various setup, and there's tons of mathematical, super nerdy ways to look at this. The app that I always use for a lot of stuff, PhotoPills, you'll see that all over the internet, all over recommendations, is phenomenal for this. It's such a great tool to be able to take all of the guesswork and complexity out of this. You can, enter in your lens, your camera setup, all of the information that you've got, and it'll give you a hyperfocal length table that you can reference. You're still gonna have to measure that out when you're out in the field or make a good guess as to what that distance is that's going to work. But I really think it's important to understand that. If you know all of the tools that you have at your disposal, you can then start to pick and choose which ones are going to work, which one's gonna be the fastest, which ones you personally just find to be difficult to work with. And have everything available at your disposal when you're out there shooting. Sometimes if you're getting into a scenario where you've got a really wide angle lens and you've got a foreground object up nice and close and you really want everything to be in focus, It's nice to know if you can get away with infinite focus, or if you're going to need to do 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number steps of a focus stacking set that you're going to need to do to get everything looking right. So one thing you want to remember when you're out shooting for an extended period of time overnight is, as the temperature drops, so can change your focus. If you don't know already, or you're about to find out when you go out and try this, the movements you make when you're setting that focus manually are such small, minute movements that make the difference between perfectly sharp and slightly fuzzy, out of focus stars, that the same can happen internally in the lens. As the temperature drops and the elements and the metal and the casing and everything cools off, it changes size a little bit, and in turn ends up tweaking your focus just enough to be slightly off. So I see this a lot when I'm shooting out west, where the daytime temperatures sometimes are in 70s, 80s, 90s, 100, and nighttime temperatures drop by as much as 30, 40 degrees. That's enough to really throw off that focus if it started warm early in the night. So a good habit, if you're going to be out there for an extended period of time, is take a number of shots, get everything dialed in, shoot what you want. If you're gonna move to another location, cool, you should probably be checking your setup and your focus anyway. If you are shooting for an extended period of time for the purpose of getting multiple exposures to stack and post-processing, especially then, you're gonna wanna just take a minute here and there to stop, check out your focus, zoom in on your last image, nice and tight, check out those stars. And if they're good, cool, keep going. You only wasted, 30 seconds checking it out, max. And if it's off, you might waste a little bit of time, you might have some additional movement in the Milky Way when you're doing your stacks, but what you gain from not having an entirely wasted night shooting is worth that minute that you're gonna spend tweaking the focus. So that's it. We can go into a number of different details, topics. I know this is just scratching the surface. It's the starting point of the focus, but it's one area that I struggled with. It's one area that I know some people I've worked with have struggled with. It's one thing that as soon as you get this down, it opens up so many other possibilities, and then you move into the next step of learning and the next problem solving and the next thing that's gonna just keep taking your images to that next level. So yeah, if you find this useful, if you want to see more videos, if you've got questions, you got comments, things you want to talk about, hit me up in the comments. Subscribe if you like what you're seeing. I know we're just getting started here, but any support you can give is motivation for me. Hit the bell, all of the things that YouTubers do,